Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook, and it's the 49th week of 2013. Tonight we'll hear commentaries from Ron Szoke, JC and Daddy Warbucks, Karen Evans-Levy, Women and the Taliban, and from the edges of the Anglosphere, Chris Hedges talks to an obstreperous Canadian, there are such things, and Tony Benn talks to absent neoliberals. There are such things as those as well. On this program, we discuss the U.S. war-making in the Middle East and around the world, and try to explain why President Obama is expanding that war and killing children, while he's pretending to the American people that, as he says, he's winding it down. People are not fools, of course. In spite of all the administration's misrepresentations, the latest poll shows that 3 out of 4 Americans are against this war. It makes it clear that the Obama administration is not working for them. But because of President Obama's intense propaganda and the shameful cooperation of the American media, most Americans don't know the extent of the war that the U.S. has brought to the rest of the world. At our recent anti-war demonstrations in Champaign and Urbana, the most frequently asked questions were, what war? And by those a little better informed, which war? Aware, our local anti-war group, has been around for 12 years, since the 9/11 attacks, when a number of residents of Champaign-Urbana and members of the University of Illinois saw that the U.S. government would use the 9/11 crimes as an excuse to carry on and expand its decades-long wars for the control of Middle East energy resources. Today, the U.S. government is threatening, invading, and occupying countries in a vast circle with a 5,000-mile diameter around the Persian Gulf, from North Africa to the borders of India and China, a region sometimes called the Greater Middle East. The U.S. military calls it Central Command. This region has the world's greatest concentration of oil and natural gas, and our government is spending hundreds of billions of dollars month after month to control it. Control and not just access to these energy resources is what our government demands. We, in fact, import little of our own oil supplies from the Mideast. Most of our imported oil comes from the Western Hemisphere, notably Canada and Venezuela. But control of world energy supplies gives the U.S. an unparalleled advantage over our economic rivals in Europe and Asia. These wars are not in the interest of 99% of Americans, only the 1% who profit from armaments and oil. In other words, President Obama is killing men, women, and children in Asia and Africa in our name because China and other countries need oil, and our government intends to have control over where they get it. The president says that he's conducting these vastly expensive wars to stop terrorism and protect civilians. But we can see that instead he's killing civilians and creating terrorists. These wars are not in Americans' interest because it's the 1% who profit from them, especially through armaments and oil. Most Americans don't know that Obama is conducting the world's greatest terrorist program. But the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London estimates the president has killed between 3,000 and 4,000 people with drones alone, including over 200 children. And that's only part of the global assassination program. Within the first 5 months of Obama's presidency in 2009, he authorized a massive expansion of clandestine military and intelligence operations worldwide. He ordered so-called special forces soldiers to be sent into both friendly and hostile nations in the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Horn of Africa. The deployment of highly trained American killers into dozens of countries was to become systemic and long-term, designed to penetrate, disrupt, defeat, or destroy enemies of the U.S. elite beyond the rule of law with no trial or pretenses of accountability. They were also to prepare the environment for larger attacks from the U.S. and NATO. I'm quoting here General Petraeus. The Obama administration was not just responding to terrorism. Obama's problem is the American people, who recently stopped him from bombing Syria. Americans don't want more war and are suffering from the administration's economic policies. But politicians, bankers, and corporations do want war, so it's clear whom Obama is working for. You're watching Aware in the Air, where we try to help frustrate the 1%'s war policy as it's put into practice by the Obama administration. And we'll begin tonight with Ron Szoke, JC and Daddy Warbucks. You'll have to explain that title, Ron.
Okay. Well, the JC refers, of course, to Jesus Christ, and some of the statements attributed to him in the Bible in Matthew 24:6, for example. He's discussing when he will return, and the second coming will be preceded by wars and rumors of war. And this ad from moneynews.com tells you how to exploit that fact and suggests how to make big money by the coming wars and rumors of war. I'm alluding, in mentioning Daddy Warbucks, of course, to the Little Orphan Annie comic strip that used to run in a lot of newspapers. And Daddy Warbucks was the big bald guy who was a war profiteer who made a whole lot of money in World War I as selling munitions. And this was done, by the way, all of this was with the approval of the cartoonist. Subsequent cartoonists have tended to be more liberal lefty, but not the author of Little Orphan Annie. So he was always on the alert for Bolsheviks, and Annie would exclaim, leaping lizards, Sandy, that's the dog. There may be some Bolsheviks around. And so it goes.
You're suggesting political education from the comic strips was probably more accurate than what we got from the history textbooks.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, who knows? But anyway, this is an ad that was on moneynews.com again. Which is apparently a branch of Newsmax, which is the farthest right news site that I've found recently. Gear up for huge gains in what will be the last great bull market of our lifetimes. Learn how you could turn $100,000 into more than $1 million in just 5 years. Click here to watch my shocking new video now. This guy says, "Dear reader, I'm a pacifist at heart. I hate war, particularly the new normal we've had since 9/11, the never-ending war on terror, and now it's intensifying with saber-rattling all over the world. Conflicts in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, hostilities between Israel and Iran, tensions between the U.S. and both Iran and North Korea, India and Pakistan, China and Japan, all reaching their boiling points. And when these multiple crises bubble over, America will be directly or indirectly involved in some of them." I suspect all of them, actually. But this puts me in a very uncomfortable position because although I hate this new normal, I have a responsibility to thousands of investors who count on me to protect and grow their wealth no matter what is happening in the world. So as much as I hate war, I can't in all good conscience ignore what may be the single greatest economic factor, a factor that I believe will create the final great bull market of our lifetimes. The plain truth is, this says, that wars and rumors of wars almost always drive select stocks through the roof. Notice the dog whistle reference here to rumors of war, again, which are in the scripture. That's why I've released a startling new video, Rumors of War, that reveals the significant economic effects this new era of warfare overseas will have on all of us, and shows how you can earn huge profits while protecting your existing wealth. In this controversial yet vitally important presentation, you'll discover why a series of regional and civil wars are about to break out all around the globe, the key sectors that will experience explosive profits as foreign investors flee overseas markets in panic, and so on. As a result, how you could turn a $100,000 portfolio into more than $1 million in just 5 years, and over 10 million in 10 years, the war-fueled energy bonanza that could make early investors 3 to 5 times richer, and a lot more. Rumors of War is completely free. So just look at his website and you'll discover how to become fabulously rich. You too can be like Daddy Warbucks.
Sorry.
Okay.
Ron, isn't there a problem? I mean, someone who wants to profit from the apocalypse, don't you think there's a, how would you put, a natural limit on?
Right.
Yeah, right. One would think so, but
You can't take it with you, but you can't even survive long enough to enjoy it.
right. If I can't take it with me, I'm not going. Someone has said. Anyway.
There you go.
What's one of the things that capitalism does for us? There's always a way someone will figure out to profit from anyone else's misery, suffering, death, and so on. There's always an angle that someone will figure out, some entrepreneur, and they'll be praised for it. But anyway, be followed up by another article from Newsmax, AP poll, Associated Press. Americans don't trust each other. I wonder why.
What were you just talking about?
Right. Yeah. By Connie Cass. You can take our word for it, Americans don't trust each other anymore. We're not talking about the loss of faith in big institutions such as the government, the church, or Wall Street, which fluctuates with events. For 4 decades, a gut-level ingredient of democracy, trust in the other fellow, has been quietly draining away. These days, only 1/3 of Americans say that most people can be trusted. Half felt that way in 1972 when the General Social Survey first asked the question. 40 years later, a record high of nearly 2/3 say that you can't be too careful in dealing with people. An AP GFK poll conducted last month found that Americans are suspicious of each other in everyday encounters. Less than 1/3 expressed a lot of trust in clerks who swipe their credit cards, drivers on the road, or people they meet when traveling. Quoting, "I'm leery of everybody," said Bart Murgowski, 27, of Albany, New York. "Caution is always a factor." Does it matter that Americans are suspicious of one another? Yes, say worried political and social scientists. What's known as social trust brings good things. A society where it's easier to compromise and make a deal, where people are willing to trust to work with those who are different from them for the common good, where trust appears to promote economic growth. Distrust, on the other hand, seems to encourage corruption. At the least, it diverts energy to counting change, drawing up 100-page legal contracts, and building gated communities. Even the rancor and gridlock in politics might stem from the effects of an increasingly distrustful citizenry, said April Clark, a Purdue University's political scientist and public opinion researcher. It's like the rules of the game, Clark said. When the trust is low, the way we react and behave with each other becomes less civil. There's no easy fix, this says. In fact, some studies suggest that it's too late for most Americans alive today to become more trusting. That research says the basis for a person's lifetime trust levels is set by his or her mid-20s and is unlikely to change, other than in some unifying crucible, such as a world war. And indeed, this harmonizes with other things the social scientists are telling us about when people's political beliefs, attitudes become firm, crystallized, and so on, typically between the ages of about 15 and 25, that 10-year period when people, depending on what's happening in the world, people's political attitudes and beliefs tend to change. In late adolescence, it's also true, largely apparently, concerning religious beliefs. People do get a little more trusting as they age, this says, but beginning with the baby boomers, each generation has started off adulthood less trusting than those who came before them. The best hope for creating a more trusting nation may be figuring out how to inspire today's youth, perhaps united by their high-tech gadgets, to trust the way previous generations did in simpler times. That seems to be a really forlorn hope. But there are still trusters around. They mentioned this farmer who conducts a roadside vegetable stand in Pennsylvania, who puts everything out there. People are trusted to put their money for it in the box and to take out change if they need it from the cash box. And he says it's going well. 99.5% of people are honest. They don't take the vegetables and just drive away without paying. And so there are still some trusting people, and it's working out well for some of them at least. But it mentions this farmer has updated the old ways of technology. He added a video camera a few years back to help catch people who drive off without paying or raid the cash box. But he says there isn't enough theft to undermine his trust in human nature. It goes on to mention the analysis of Robert Putnam in Bowling Alone about how the trust of Americans for each other has declined over the past few decades. And University of Maryland professor Eric Uslander, who studies politics and trust, puts the blame for declining trust on economic inequality. Mm-hmm. Trust has declined as the gap between the nation's rich and poor gapes ever wider, Uslander says, and more Americans feel shut out. They've lost their sense of a shared fate. Tellingly, trust rises with wealth. That is, as people become more prosperous, they become more trusting. People who believe that the world is a good place and it's going to get better and you can help make it better, they will be trusting, Uslander says. If you believe it's dark and driven by outside forces you can't control, you will be a mistruster. And it goes on in that vein. So, yeah, I think this is an important social variable. It's been identified as an absolutely crucial aspect of national unity and economic growth and prosperity by a number of people. Francis Fukuyama has weighed in on this point for whatever that's worth. And I think it's interesting. So can you trust people? The next person coming down the sidewalk at you, how you can be sure? Can you be sure they're not going to assault you? And so on. Well,
I have a couple.
No one can ever be completely sure, but it's fascinating.
I have a couple comments about this.
Yeah.
Combining the two ideas of war profiteering and people being afraid of their neighbors. Yeah, if you don't want to invest in war and drones, which is a really lucrative field, evidently, because over 180 countries actually own drones. Some of them are used for. Some of them don't have ballistics on them, but they can always be adapted to. I mean, the Army originally started using drones that were not set up with ballistics on it, and then they started just attaching them themselves. Anyway. So if you don't want to invest directly into that, you could invest in security, like, get your neighbors to be afraid of everybody else and then, build walls. And right. Security is a really lucrative thing to be
it's
in.
a booming business.
Guns, any type of thing that would make someone make them feel insecure and then provide the thing that will solve it, like cameras and things like that. Which brings me to the second thing that I want to talk about. I had a conversation with a very good friend the other day about putting security cameras in public places and things like that. And her opinion was that you can't trust people not to steal your bicycle or your purse or things like that. If even if you lock your bicycle to a bike rack, it might get stolen. So you should have a camera out there. And so I brought up the idea that you should probably not trust the person behind the camera. That you could probably trust the person you could see better than the person that you could not see. And so she was putting all of her trust in the person who you could not see. And I tend to not put my trust in that person. But I do trust the people that I do see and that I can actually interact with, and our neighbors and friends, and we actually share even a sidewalk with, more than I trust the person behind cameras. And I can't trust so anyway, I think I'll stop at that point, just saying that if even when you invest in security cameras and things like that, you are trusting someone that you do not know to do the right thing. And we do it all the time.
Yeah, society becomes impossible without some basic level of that. I mean,
The ancients put this quis ipsos custodes custodiet. Quis ipsos custodes custodiet. Who will watch the watchers?
Exactly. That's my point. Who watches the watchers?
Well, I mean, and of course the point generalizes, as the points I think Ron was making here do too. Point generalizes in the sense that we have just come through, or we just entered into, some realization of the vast system of watching and surveillance that primarily our government is behind and is indeed worldwide. And the limits of this keep expanding. We hear that we know only a little bit of the material that Edward Snowden made available, and that the suggestion is the rest of his material talks about how widespread this intense scrutiny really is. Someone, somewhere, probably in a big building in Utah, knows who took your bike.
Right.
So it's extremely dangerous.
Or know that you are leaving your bike and can come and get it too.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
And there was a note just this last week about how Americans are being encouraged to accept this state of affairs. Senator Dianne Feinstein, the liberal Democrat from California, and Representative Mike Rogers, a Republican from Michigan, are leaders of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, respectively. They were on a Sunday talk show this past Sunday to put fear into the hearts of Americans.
Okay.
They told us we're in more danger than ever. And the obvious corollary to this is that Americans need to take their fear of government and redirect it to nameless and faceless terrorists who are out to destroy us. This is not an inflammatory summary. Quote, "There are new bombs, very big bombs," Feinstein warned, "that go through metal-detecting magnetometers." She warned of huge malevolence out there. The evil people are doing this. "This puts enormous pressure on our intelligence community," she said, "which means Americans have to stop criticizing the NSA because, quote, they are not the bad guys." I mean, this is the sort of stuff we're being told by our political leaders. The uses of fear are very great. They always have been. I mean, all of us grew up in the era of the Cold War, where the fear of the Russians and the fear of the Soviet Union and of international war was taken as a motivation for whatever the United States government might do around the world, because after all, they were keeping us safe. They were providing security from the communist menace. Now, this, the level of lies and misrepresentation here are so great and so pervasive that it takes a great deal of effort to break through it. William James once said that in every age there is a form to the forms of thought, which is like the air we breathe, is so pervasive that we become aware of it only with the greatest difficulty. And becoming aware of this atmosphere of fear, that there's another element to it, it seems to me, that our economic model is a model of competition, a model in which we're supposed to be afraid of those who are competing with us. Every businessman is the enemy of every other businessman, as the old man in the British Museum said. And a graduating high school student going out looking for a job right now is told immediately he's in tremendous competition with any other people for whatever jobs might be available, even those that don't pay decently. Right. So in a situation like that, fear eats the soul, right?
Yes. Well, I've noticed there's a remarkable correlation between fear and distrust of other people and right-wing political convictions, apparently. And the people I get warnings from about what might happen to you if you don't get gas at the gas station correctly and have someone steal your car or something,
Seriously?
comes from a certain group of people who are known to have extreme right-wing convictions, and it's remarkably reliable correlation there. The constant appeals to fear, to greed, and to hatred are quite remarkable to me.
One way we might talk about the way in which this fear is being utilized by the Obama administration right now is the situation with Iran. The administration tells you that they are magnanimously doing a deal with the vicious Iranians because of the immense forbearance of President Obama and his efforts to drag the Iranians to the table. These are all flat lies, complete lies. Iran as a state has not attacked another state in about 2 centuries by most accounts, whereas America's chief client in the region and Iran's major adversary has, since its formation in 1948, I'm speaking of the State of Israel, attacked its enemies roughly every other year.
Yes. Yes.
And so this is a situation the U.S. is working in when Obama says he is doing this wonderful deal with the Iranians. In fact, the deal is barely in the interests of the Iranians at all. They're limiting their ability to do something they have a perfect right to do under international law, that is, enrich uranium. They're actually voluntarily limiting that to in order to get in return a very slight easing of the vicious economic sanctions that the U.S. has put on Iran and has manipulated the UN into putting on Iran. So the situation of this deal with Iran is pretty far from what the administration says. And I might say parenthetically here that this is not surprising from Obama. When Obama was running for Congress the first time, when he was running for the Senate, not his first run for president, when he was running for the Senate, he said at that time that if the issue arose, he would be in favor of surgical strikes on Iran, that is, bombing on Iran, because after all, we can't allow the mad mullahs to have nuclear weapons. This is flat fear-mongering. Propaganda, very far from an accurate description of the situation, and there's no indication that Obama has ever changed his views on it. He's never retracted any of the things that he said about the perhaps need to attack Iran when he was running for office. So now we have this arrangement with the P5+1, as it's called, basically the Western states with the U.S. in the lead, and the Iranians, for what is really a 6-month moratorium of American violations of the UN Charter, that is threats of war, and which are condemned by the UN Charter. We have 6 months in which a larger deal or more general deal is supposed to be worked out, and there are immense political forces in the United States working against it. And most of those forces are centered in the Congress. The congressional delegation from Illinois, Senators Durbin and Kirk, and our own representative from this district, Rodney Davis, are all pressing for greater sanctions on Iran in opposition to this temporary ceasefire, verbal ceasefire, that the administration has worked out with the Iranians. Now, this is a terrible situation. War here is only to the interest of the long-term American attempt to control the economy, particularly the energy economy of the region. That's what we've always been interested in, and that's what the Obama administration is interested in. And the only thing new about it is that they're doing it without the immediate threat of war, and our congressmen are desperately trying to renew those threats of war. This is a terrible situation.
And the situation with Iran is being talked about a lot right now because of the relief of the sanctions, and Congress talking about it too. Okay, what could Iran possibly do to remove all the sanctions? What could they do to make us, our Congress happy enough to say, all right, all the sanctions are lifted? There's nothing that they could do. They could completely abandon their enrichment stuff, and still people would want, well, right-wingers and Congress, I think, in general, would still want sanctions to be held against the people of Iran. So there's absolutely no way out from this. This one small action on the part of the State Department to actually relieve some of the sanctions was brilliant. This is the best thing that has happened in 2013, or one of the best. There's a few really good things that have happened, and that's one of the best things. That's amazing that it happened. There is incredible pressure from the people on the street to say, no, Israel's really scared. Of course Israel's going to say that they're scared because they have nuclear weapons. We give them all sorts of weapons. We give them all sorts of financing for those weapons, and they also produce a lot of their own weapons. And Israel, we have to, for some reason, people think that the United States has to be in really close connection with Israel on everything that Israel does, no matter what it is, even invading other countries and abusing the Palestinians and all sorts of things. And yet, so Israel is doing horrible things, and yet we are friends with them, and people don't want us to relieve the sanctions that are really brutal on the Iranian people for any reason, and there's no way out from it. The only option is eventual war with Iran. That's the only way to get out from under the sanctions, I think. And I think that's what we would be pushing them toward if we kept increasing the sanctions, or if we kept maintaining the sanctions.
I think one has to look at the general American policy in regard to Iran, and indeed in regard to the Middle East over time, to see what's at stake here. I mean, the U.S. Overthrew the government of Iran in a CIA-organized coup in 1953. It established a dictator, and from 1953 to 1979, the U.S. had control of Iran's oil production through its puppet dictator in Iran. What happened is the Iranians in '79 threw out that dictator and established a government of their own, a regime that is essentially still in power. Now, what the U.S. has been wanting to do ever since 1979 is restore the status quo ante, where the U.S. has a biddable government in Tehran, a government which will do what the U.S. says in the great American desire to control the oil resources of the Middle East. Now, their enemies here, the enemies of the United States, are finally Russia and China, who have their own economic organization that they threaten to incorporate Iran into, so to speak. The U.S. wants to prevent that. Right. They want to prevent Iran from essentially doing deals with Iran, with China and Russia, that removes American control over Iranian oil. And we're willing to do almost anything. We're not unidimensional on this, as they say in the football world. We're willing to use whatever weapons we've got, including sanctions. Remember, sanctions are not a joke. The Clinton administration was willing to kill 500,000 children, they said in so many words, in Iraq in order to make their sanctions work in Iraq. They didn't blink at the suggestion that would be the result of the program. The American approach to Iran is no different. We're willing to make these sanctions vicious and lethal. And what we hear from our senators and congressmen is a cry for more dead children as a result of sanctions. It's that simple. And it seemed, I agree with you that it's good that this agreement has taken place, But the agreement itself.
But the motivations behind it are still.
Well, yeah, and even its dimension. I mean, the one aspect of the sanctions was that the U.S., with the help of the UN, froze billions of dollars of money that belonged to Iran in overseas banks and so forth.
Yeah.
We cut off really the economic lifelines of Iran to the West. Now, about 7% of that money frozen has been liquefied by this deal. That's all. The rest of it is all still frozen.
Right.
And the U.S. says, you know, hey, okay, if you play ball, if you do what we say about oil and so forth, you know, we can talk about the rest of it. But in the meantime, hey, that's all we can do to keep the Israelis in check here, and we could unleash them at any moment. You know. So the U.S. position is not, how shall I say it, admirable. Even though I agree with you, it's better that they have an agreement than they don't.
Right. You had, I just want to ask a quick question about, you said Iran had not invaded another country. What happened between Iran and Iraq? Who started that?
Iraq attacked Iran.
Okay.
And Iraq, with American help.
Oh, right.
I mean, you know, it was the U.S. If we didn't actually suggest it, in other words, Saddam Hussein looked at a post-revolutionary Iraq. Sorry, let's try again. Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, looked at post-revolutionary Iran, that is Iran after the 1979 revolution, and saw a country that was really remarkably divided and a military that had been essentially eviscerated by the revolution. That military had been the Shah's military. And when the Iranian Revolution succeeded, what that meant was a lot of the opposition to the revolution came from the Shah's military. So the military structure of Iran was in great disarray, and the Iraqis said, hey, easy pickings. And the disputes between Iraq and Iran had a great deal to do with oil. Particularly, there's one oil-rich region that lies between them, and the Iraqis said, hey, it's ripe fruit.
Right.
You know,
Let's
that's
go
for
get
us.
it.
Let's go get it. And the remarkable thing was that they weren't able to go get it. The U.S., in spite of the U.S. backing, everything from intelligence to the U.S. even allowed an attack on an American ship in the Persian Gulf by the Iraqis. They said it was a mistake, you know, but it was like the Liberty incident. That's a favored status that American clients have.
Right.
And
you're allowed one mistake.
Yeah,
or
well,
three,
yeah, or whatever it is. But the Iraq-Iran war, in fact, ended in a stalemate. The Iraqis were unable to conquer the parts of Iran they wanted, and they retreated in disarray, which was one of the sources of the Iraq move into Kuwait in 1990, a move that also may well have been approved by the U.S., some suggest as a black advance. The U.S. Giving up on Iraq as a new client in the Middle East said, okay, go ahead and attack your neighbor, and then we'll attack you.
Gotcha.
We don't know, but it's the continuity of the U.S. policy, the U.S. willingness to sanction the worst sort of murder and depredations in the Middle East society in order to make its writ run in the oil world. That's the one thing that's not in doubt.
Right.
You're watching Aware on the Air. We discuss the American war in the Middle East and around the world. We have several other things here. Ron, did you have something else you wanted to?
Just a minor note.
Okay.
There's a bill apparently proposed in Congress to honor with the Congressional Medal of Honor everyone who was in the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, at the end of World War II, which mutated into the CIA, and which in turn seems to have mutated into JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command. These are all groups carrying out covert operations, and we've just heard something about what they did in Iran. Nearly 70 years after its agents played a key role in defeating the Axis powers, which is dubious. But
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Who's writing this press release?
Right, it's unsigned AP. The spy organization that later became the Central Intelligence Agency is being proposed to receive the highest civilian honor bestowed by Congress, the Congressional Gold Medal. Legislation introduced last week by Senator Mark Kirk, Republican of Illinois, and Representative Robert Latta, Republican of Ohio, would collectively award the medal to the members of the Office of Strategic Services, known as the OSS. And it goes on to talk about Wild Bill Donovan and that crew. So.
Reading the opening chapters of Tim Weiner's Legacy of Ashes, his history of the CIA, and about the relationship between the OSS and the CIA, that you alluded to, Ron, it would be worthwhile here. And also, it'd be interesting to ask, what is our junior senator doing here? The last time I looked, it was 2013. The war that he's talking about ended in 1945, and he wants a medal for the organization that was supposed to be a clandestine arm of the American government in that war. Certainly it's worthwhile to recall that war and to get the history straight. I'd suggest, for example, Nicholson Baker's wonderful book called Human Smoke, about the nature of that war. But what's Kirk doing, what's Senator Kirk doing right now with this medal? I mean, this is clearly a propaganda move to praise the sort of operations the OSS and the early CIA undertook. And Kirk is the man, after all, who is driving the sanctions, the push for more sanctions against Iran in the Senate right now. Now, he's making a sort of suggestion, an equation here, right? Just as these guys worked against the Nazis, so we got to work against new Nazis, and by the way, the new Nazis are the Iranians. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's absolutely specious, but it's clear that it doesn't come out of human smoke, that it's a conscious propaganda attempt to link the World War II activities with current politics.
Interesting.
That's what he's thinking about.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think he's smart enough to?
Pardon? Well, yeah. Some people will say, isn't this the man who had a stroke, a year or so ago? Well, I think indeed he sees this as part of his recuperation as a political figure.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
I think it's no accident that these are the two legislative initiatives that our junior senator is pressing. Kill Iranians and honor questionable American spies from 1945. You're watching Aware on the Air. Karen, you had, I understand, something you wanted to talk about in relation to Afghanistan, that war, that was being wound down until we heard last week, oh no, well maybe it won't be, but unless our puppet in Afghanistan doesn't start doing what he's told, we might just sit up and withdraw. I thought we were withdrawing.
I thought
that was what was
plan.
on. No, don't. All bets are off. We, in fact, plan to be there until 2024, the administration allowed quietly again this week, if they didn't have to threaten Hamid Karzai by withdrawing. The only people I think are talking seriously about Afghanistan, and they're off the air now, are the guys who do the NPR program Car Talk. Two Boston mechanics who do a very funny program and have for many years. Their shtick has been picked up by Harry Shearer, who does a brilliant radio show called The Show, under the name Karzai Talk, where these guys are transmogrified into Hamid Karzai and his brother, and Shearer does an absolutely devastating parody that says something about what the U.S. is actually doing in Afghanistan.
Shearer is amazing.
What they're really doing is protecting women, right?
Right, which is exactly. I almost didn't come today because I didn't really have anything prepared, and then I ran into a friend, and we had a good conversation. But during that conversation, 6 minutes. We have 6 minutes. Oh, okay. Gotcha, 15. There's a 1 and a 5. We got into a conversation, and I just mentioned that I was a peace activist, and he said, "Oh, Afghanistan. Let's talk about Afghanistan." So, my friend and I talked about Afghanistan, and he was saying, "Isn't it terrible that when the troops the U.S. troops leave Afghanistan, that the Taliban will take over again, and then the women in Afghanistan will suffer again under the Taliban. They won't be allowed to be educated, and they will have to wear full burqas. And so that immediately made me want to come to Aware on the Air. The Taliban, as a woman, I think I can approach this better than some others maybe. The Taliban, every member of the Taliban has a mother, and they also probably have relationships with other women, maybe a wife or daughters or sisters. And so on behalf of women everywhere, I will say that there has not been a society that has not abused their women. There has not been a society where we did not have to fight for education, for the right to vote, for the right to drive, for the right to walk where we wanted to walk, the right to work, the right to stay home, the right to health care. And so an army, a military, cannot provide those things for women. Women can fight for those things, and women have won those things in a lot of societies, and they will win them in Afghanistan. They will. But they will work through compassion from the people that are in power, and not through military force, and not through aggression, and not through violence, because women don't have access to things that would women in those societies often do not have access to things that would give them power, like what we in America call things that would give them power, like weapons and things like that. But they will work through compassion, as we have in this country, and seek equality the way that women all over the world have sought equality. And it's not through force. It will be through compassion, individually working. And there are women already that are fighting for the right to drive in countries where they haven't been able to drive, where they had to be driven by a hired driver, a male hired driver. And they will fight for it, and they will win it, and they will also get education. But military, the U.S. military does not. If you want to educate women, you don't send the U.S. military to do it. It's not going to happen that way, and it doesn't happen that way, and that is not the reason we're in Afghanistan. It has nothing to do with women's rights. It has nothing to do with it has nothing to do with that. So and I really believe that my friend was coming from a place of compassion, that he wanted to. He's a very compassionate person, and he's also a very educated person. He has a PhD. He was a professor at the University of Illinois. He worked for the National Science Foundation. He's extremely well educated and compassionate. So if he really wants to work on a society that abuses their women, then work in the United States. There are a lot of women that are being abused here. There are a lot of people that import immigrants illegally to bring them here so that they can have power over them, domestics, use them. And so if you want to work in a society for women's rights, work on your own society. There's a lot happening right here in Champaign-Urbana. If you want to work for human rights, work for immigrant rights here. And we have come a long way in the state of Illinois for immigrant rights. In fact, right now, driver's licenses, people will be able to get driver's license even if they are not U.S. citizens. And that is a great thing, because that was being used against people. The police would stop drivers, and they would say that they didn't have a driver's license and use that as a legal stepping stone toward deporting people or toward putting them in jail and separating them from their families and then not releasing them for long periods of time. And that was a huge power thing. So now that people will be able to apply for driver's license, that is, I believe, a basic human right to let them go to the jobs that they are legally allowed to go to and let them get there legally through driving. Anyway, so if you want to work for human rights, stay in your own country.
Thank you very much, Karen. Comment, Ron?
And do it there. Sorry.
Well, no, but I've heard this line before. Even worse than the USA is Saudi Arabia. And when they say, well,
Saudi
we're fighting
Arabia.
to emancipate the women of Afghanistan, I say, well, if that's your big concern, turn your efforts to Saudi Arabia. That typically shuts them up instantly.
Yeah, why do we have a standard for our friends versus our non-friends? Our friends can abuse women, but our non-friends can't. Yeah.
I think the height of hypocrisy on this issue was reached by Hillary Clinton in the demonstrations in Chicago 2 years ago against a meeting of NATO. NATO, after all, is the organization that the U.S. is using in Afghanistan to fight some of its battles. The actual force in Afghanistan that the U.S. is running, is using to kill people in Afghanistan, is a NATO force. A big NATO meeting in Chicago, and there were major demonstrations against it by people who understood what a lie the war in Afghanistan was based on. Hillary Clinton took one of her chief proteges who had been instrumental in arranging the attack on Libya through the United Nations, an attack by NATO on Libya, took this woman and made her head of Amnesty International, the supposed peace group and so forth. Amnesty International USA, that is.
Right.
Amnesty International USA ran a counter program to the criticisms of NATO in Chicago, in which, under the aegis of Amnesty International, women in Afghanistan were taken as the beneficiaries of NATO's Afghan military campaign. I mean, nothing could be more. It was exactly the sort of thing you described, but done absolutely cynically by by Hillary Clinton's State Department and this woman who was briefly made head of Amnesty International USA. She's moved on now. The contradiction between what she was doing and what Amnesty International was supposed to be doing was too great, and she now heads another group supposedly involved in human rights. But the willingness of the American government and one of the leading NGOs, non-governmental organizations, Amnesty International, to force this propaganda line that the U.S. was killing Afghans in defense of women seemed to me to reach heights of hypocrisy we hadn't seen in a while. And this is the Obama administration, where the standard is very high.
And the funny thing is, we're killing the sons, daughters, women, children that we're supposed to be protecting. I mean, that's, and we're using drones that are killing civilians, and we're killing the we have 5 minutes now.
And occasionally we hear about it.
I know,
Occasionally we hear about it. Not often.
And it happens all the time. It does.
Headline, top U.S. commander apologizes for airstrike.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, right. The top U.S. commander in Afghanistan apologized to President Hamid Karzai for a drone strike that killed a child, and NATO promised an investigation Friday as rising tensions threatened efforts to persuade the Afghan leader to sign a long-delayed security agreement. So this top general, Joseph Dunford, called Karzai late Thursday to express deep regrets for the incident and any civilian casualties, the commander's spokesman said. So some collateral damage there, and gee whiz, we're sorry, it's regrettable. We didn't mean to, so.
I'm reminded of, I'm old enough to remember a tagline from the Vietnam War that I think has dropped out. I mean, it's only people my age who remember it. But the phrase, sorry about that, was used in Vietnam days just the way you describe. We've just wiped out another village of peasants, old men, women, and children, and so forth. Sorry about that, is the American response.
Yeah.
And that the notion, the phrase came from American troops in Vietnam, and other Americans, as they very, very slowly realized how the war was being fought, something I think really only affected finally a minority of Americans. Nick Turse's recent book, Kill Anything That Moves, is one of the few accounts all these years later of what happened there. That was the basis that, sorry about that line.
It comes to be used in a ironic, mocking, sarcastic way.
Exactly.
And I want to comment on that further sometime, the state of irony that we've worked ourselves into.
Yep. So I think we have 3 minutes. Yeah, go for it. I think closing is what you're going to do. Sorry,
All right.
I didn't mean to interrupt you for that.
You have been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, in the 49th week of 2013. It's what White House aides call Terror Tuesday today, the day each week when President Obama picks out some people to be murdered by drones or U.S. death squads. That actually happens. The U.S. Joint Special Operations Command carries out the majority of the assassinations, but some, at least, are carried out by drones. The president's underlings, notably CIA Director John Brennan, compile a list of who should be executed. And the president then chooses from a stack of baseball cards with the names and descriptions of these people on it who will die. Passes those cards on, the orders go out to the Drone Command and to the Special Operations Command, and people die around the world, from Yemen to the Philippines, as a result of President Obama's selections on Terror Tuesday. These assassinations, of course, are carried out in secrecy. The administration doesn't name who it's picked out to die, but literally thousands of men and women and children have been ordered killed by President Obama. Most Americans don't know that the U.S. is running this terrorist program, and so on Terror Tuesdays, we should remember it. Obama told aides he's really good at killing people, the new book, Double Down, claims. You have been watching Aware on the Air. We want to remind you of other programs here on UPTV, now streaming online on urbanapublictelevision.org. Weekdays, Mondays to Friday, Democracy Now! At 7 a.m., repeated at 5 p.m. At 8 a.m., The Big Picture with Tom Hartman. Our thanks, as usual, to our director and producer, Jason Liggett. If you object to the Obama administration's conducting illegal and unjustified war and lying about the reasons for it, join us. Aware meets every Sunday evening, 5 to 6 p.m. at the White Horse Inn on John Street in Champaign, near the UIUC campus. We discuss the war and plan activities against it. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government. Oh, and I should say, in terms of activities, this coming Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. in downtown Champaign, Aware will demonstrate and distribute flyers about the war. Come and join us, hold a sign, pass out literature to your fellow citizens going by. The Aware has been doing this for years on the first Saturday of every month, and the first Saturday of December should be no exception. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about, but many Americans don't. Manning, Assange, Snowden, and others who are being persecuted by the Obama administration. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for Karen Aram, Ron Szoke, Karen Evans-Levy, Stuart Levy, David Johnson, and other members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.